Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and here with Bruce Fein. Dennis won't be able to make it this week, and Ryan texted me just a few minutes ago saying he'd arrive a little bit late, so we look forward to Ryan's arrival any minute, hopefully. Um, so I would like to start off this week uh, with a personal statement. Um, I think that every week as we have these conversations, I always consider how can we make these conversations more meaningful, how we can convert these conversations into actions, how can we really create an impact uh, through this forum. And so I'd like to make an appeal, a plea. Uh, I think it seems like the majority of the country uh, watch with disgust, what's going on with in Minneapolis and in St. Paul and Minnesota, uh, the behavior of ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, uh, their words, their actions. Uh, to me, it seems like really a reign of terror, and I think uh, maybe majority of the country actually would agree with that statement. Um, Now, many people can say, "What can we do about it?" I think there's something that we can do about it, and I think we have to do it with a sense of urgency. What is that something that we can do? Well, there needs to be a budget reconciliation by the end of this month, on 30th, or the government will get shut down. Uh, in the House, I think the Republicans have such a slim majority that it's possible to convert a couple of people from the Republican Party if the Democrats vote as a bloc. So, so my appeal is we should defund government if government does not defund ICE. And when I talk about defunding ICE, I talk about defunding ICE unless ICE reforms, there are really significant substantive reforms. I have a list of very specific substantive reforms um, that I posted on my Twitter account, the Wernick files. I think they're too long to go into right now, but it's easy to ask Congress to say do something, and if you ask Congress to do something and you're not specific and precise about what you want it to do, it might do something, it might not, and if they does do something, it'll probably most likely to be cosmetic. So the demands have to be, in my opinion, very specific. You have to say this is what we expect to see, and if you don't get it, defund ICE. At some point, people have to take a stand. If a government, we should not fund a government that is at war with its citizens. To me, that's where shutting government over and let the people who would rather see the government shut down rather than see real significant substantive reforms of ICE, let everybody go on record. Okay. People hold hearings. There are all these nice words. People have all this expression of sympathy. Okay. And people should keep putting up the videos and keep expressing, their outrage that this is not a country that they recognize anymore. But that's not enough. Okay. I'm not suggesting people stop the protests, that they stop putting up the videos, stop helping in whatever way that's legal. They should do that, but we need to do more. If we want to have an impact, we need to do more. And doing more means maybe writing, calling, texting, faxing your Congress rep, all your representatives every day. Remind them, speak out, vote. Do not allow government to be funded without significant, substantive, tangible reforms of ICE. Anyone who does not work to stop the funding of ICE, unless there are those significant, substantive reforms, doesn't deserve to speak out because they've proven their words are garbage. Okay? So let them prove that their words are not garbage. Let them prove that their words have substance Let them prove that their words have meaning. Now is the time. January 30th, shut down the government or reform ICE. Uh, Bruce, what's your opinion on my opening statement?
Well, what I would do, Jeffrey, I would supplement that with what are the conditions? How does ICE need to be reformed? And this is where Congress can act on its own. Number one, they have to create a private damage action against the individual ICE officers who violate the statutes or the Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment, in apprehending, detaining, questioning any person in the United States, even including things like double, treble damages. So there's a monetary incentive to comply with the law. And this would be a statute that would authorize the suit against the individual officer in their individual capacities. So they need to pay, not have insured or the government to come in and step into their shoes. The second thing that needs to happen is that to add to the deterrence, Congress needs by statute to say any information that ICE obtains by illegal, unconstitutional searches and seizures shall be excluded, including the fruit of the poisonous tree, in any deportation hearing. So that right now, under an old Supreme Court decision, if the ICE violates your constitutional rights, it still use the evidence against you in deportation. That needs to change. That needs surely to change. And then there ought to be as well a very clear federal statute that says it cannot be part of probable cause under the Fourth Amendment to use someone's heritage from nationality, race, or religion as a factor in deciding whether to investigate or interrogate anyone about their citizenship status. Those are the specifics that need to bring DHS under the rule of law. That's what I would add.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's very important. I also, many people defend Trump's behavior as justifiable if you take the Hamiltonian perspective of, an energetic executive. I think, I think that Hamilton, if there was articles of impeachment brought against Trump, that I think Hamilton would sign those articles of impeachment. And here's the argument that I would make. I think people conflate certain issues. One is, an energetic executive that serves basically a life term, and an energetic executive that serves a life term, as long as that energetic executive is constrained by law, as long as they are checked by Congress, as long as they are removable by impeachment and subordinate to the Constitution. So Hamilton, I don't believe, and maybe you have a different opinion, was advocating that a president should have the power of a monarch. I think there's a difference between the discussion of subjecting a president to constant ongoing elections, as opposed to checking the president not by the ballot, but by the checks and balances embedded in the system on which Congress would be the check on the president, and that removal would not be by ballot, but removal would be by impeachment, or basically the president would get neutered by the controlling the power of the purse. But I think when people like to cite Hamilton as a rationalization or as a pretext for how Trump uses executive power, I think there's enough other quotes from Hamilton that I think dispel that as a complete fallacy, and it's either a stupidity or intellectually dishonest. What's your opinion about that, Bruce?
Well, one thing you need to remember about Hamilton is he left the Constitutional Convention about midway, and that he had one time proposed a lifetime election of a president. And it was so repudiated, it didn't even come to a vote at the Constitutional Convention. The voice that obtained the consensus behind the Constitution was the voice of James Madison, not Alexander Hamilton. But even putting that aside, Hamilton himself understood and wrote that the war powers still stayed with Congress. It wasn't in the executive branch. And he wrote, I think, as you've noted in Federalist 65, that impeachment of presidents would come about not because you had to establish criminal behavior, but it was an attack on the system itself, what he called a political offense, because the structure of government was being imperiled. And that obviously encompasses not just Trump, but predecessors that by this usurpation of power and the migration of all authority to the White House has totally destroyed the checks and balances that were what Madison called a structural Bill of Rights. That's to protect us from majoritarian tyranny, from tyranny by an oligarchy or a plutocracy, or tyranny by one. And that is obviously what we're experiencing today.
Is there any evidence that when Madison served Washington, that he told Washington, why are you even consulting Congress? Just ignore them, ignore Congress, ignore the courts. Everybody loves you. Just do whatever it is you want.
No, in fact, the evidence, at least one specific example, Jeffrey, is just the opposite. When Napoleonic Wars began, and there were questions about whether we should side with France or for Britain, and what would our neutrality rights be in our maritime commerce, at least initially, Washington issued an executive order, if you will, a proclamation, actually making it a crime to stray from neutrality. But Madison said that was 1973. But Madison said Congress has to decide this issue, and Congress debated and passed the Neutrality Act of 1794. That act still remains on the books today. And so the president was subordinated to the Congress at that time. And that's how the system is supposed to work. Not because the president is necessarily higher or lower on any moral barometer, but because it's understood that presidents, all of them, have a temptation to concoct excuses for war, because during wartime they are able to aggregate power, almost limitless power. And we see that today. I want to make reference to Mr. Trump's latest comments about Greenland, and his Secretary of Treasury saying, will we declare a national emergency to prevent a national emergency? The argument now for obtaining, conquering Greenland is, if we don't do it, China or Russia sometime in the next 1,000 years might do it. So we got to preempt them, which has no stopping point. On that score, Jeffrey, we might as well say we have a right to conquer the whole world. Who knows who will attack us at some time? Democracies could turn into tyrannies. They could attack us. Anything is conceivable. So the only way that we can protect ourselves is to conquer the whole world, and we own and run everything. And that's kind of the lunacy where we are at present, where the executive branch is now inventing national emergencies over Iceland. Nationally, or what? No, over the Solomon Islands, over Fiji, anything under the sun, to justify limitless executive power. And also, you have to ask, okay, if we're going into Greenland, where's the money coming from? Congress hasn't appropriated any money even to buy Greenland, assuming they would sell it. Again, this shows the legitimate concern that the framers had with limitless executive power, and why, despite its slowness and the fact that it's not perfect, they entrusted the lion's share of powers, including over foreign affairs, to the Congress of the United States.
Yeah, I think Jefferson has referred to this as elective despotism.
Yeah.
Do you think Hamilton was an advocate of elective despotism?
No, he was not. Even the most ardent advocates of a strong executive would view Mr. Trump as in a totally different universe. Basically, it's actually exercising more power than King George III did over the colonists that provoked 1776 revolution. And Hamilton was in favor of the revolution. All of them were. That's why they're living in an independent country from Great Britain. And the revolution was to repudiate kingly powers, not to embrace them. And now we have now re-embraced them. And I can't believe a signal signatory of the Declaration of Independence, a signal signatory of the Constitution of the United States, a single participant in the Constitutional Convention, which collectively runs a little bit more than 100, would view Mr. Trump as doing anything but committing impeachable offenses virtually every day.
Yeah, I'm focusing on Hamilton because Hamilton is the one that people who support Trump's use of executive orders is where they look to hopefully get their gravitas from, by the citations of Hamilton as a founder, and that Hamilton would advocate for this. While Hamilton left the convention, he was one of the trio that wrote the Federalist Papers, and he advocated for the passage of the Constitution as it stood. And he explained, as you already referenced now, that that I've also referenced, two specific Federalist Papers. One is the 65 you mentioned, and then the 69 with respect to impeachment and what is meant by commander in chief. And it's certainly not the way it's construed by Trump and his minions. Do not construct what commander in chief means, as opposed to how Hamilton in 69 explained, what it means. So my point is that the point I'm trying to make here is even the most ardent defender of a strong, vibrant, energetic executive would find that this is appalling and would probably sign on to letters of impeachment. And I would think, especially given the fact that he didn't want a president to behave like this, and with the knowledge that if he got his proposal passed, it would have put more burden on Congress really impeaching a president, because that ultimately would be their only check. If somebody had a lifetime term, what would be that term could only be truncated through impeachment. And so I gotta think that Hamilton wanted a vigorous, aggressive use, energetic use of impeachment.
Yeah. Well, I would just add this comment, Jeffrey. If we talk about originalism, original understanding, you ordinarily look to the views of the person whose ideas prevailed rather than dissent, right? And Madison was the originalist of the originalists. He not only was there at the convention, he drafted George Washington's initial inaugural address, his response to the House to the inaugural address. He basically was the architect of the Bill of Rights. And he was the one who kept the most comprehensive notes. He was, I would say, the intellectual brainchild behind the Constitution. And his views were the consensus view. And people asked Madison, even in Congress when he attended the first one, well, what does this mean? Because he drafted it. So if you're an originalist, you give weight to Madison 10 times more than Hamilton, because his were the views that prevailed. He stayed at the convention. He signed the Constitution. He was at the takeoff with Washington and the Bill of Rights, which was basically a codicil to the Constitution. And Madison's views are totally and completely clear that the president, especially in matters of national security, could not be trusted. And in 1812, when he decided he needed, to go to war against Great Britain because they were destroying our neutrality rights and impressing our seamen, he said, Congress, it's up to you to decide. I can't decide on my own. This has to be a consensus decision after deliberation. It's also true that Madison, as president in 1810, the Senate initially wanted to give him power to go to war against France or Britain if they continued to attack our maritime commerce. And he told them, no, you can't give me away that power. You have to decide yourself that this is the appropriate step to take. This is the only president in the history, maybe of all executives in the world, that said, you can't give me the war power. I have to operate through Congress.
Yeah, because as a nation, I mean, at what point do we look at ourselves and say that this is just not insanity? I mean, really. I mean, I don't like to, sometimes I do to like to throw out words to provoke, but I'm not even trying to do that right now. I mean, I don't know alternative words to describe these circumstances. Someone that sends a letter saying, you didn't give me a Nobel Prize, so because you didn't reward me for the peace I brought to the world, that I no longer feel compelled to continue to provide peace to the world. I mean, that's kind of like what he wrote. And because of that, I want Greenland. I mean, how could anyone not think this is insanity? Yeah. How can anyone justify this?
Yeah. Anyway, and why pick out Greenland? He could have said, I'm going to take over Great Britain. I take over Poland. I take over any place I want because you didn't give me a Nobel Peace Prize. Really? I mean, this is the action of a 3-year-old, I'm going to take my lollipop back because you didn't give me the bicycle I wanted or something like that. This is the guy who's got the ability to start a nuclear war. This is the person, the greatest power in the history of the world. And he's a little kid, literally a little child. And if you can't see that at this stage, then you're willfully blind. You are reneging on your obligation as a citizen. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And you're blind. You're not having any vigilance at all. And it's not like it's a slip of the tongue. It's one day, Jeffrey, a Freudian slip or something. He continues to repeat this over and over and over again. Most recently to the New York Times, he repeated it to Bob Woodward, as you recounted on the tapes. I'm just, my instincts as a little kid. I do what the heck I want to do. I don't pay attention to anybody else. And this is more than alarming. It's terrifying. This guy's got the ability to start a nuclear war.
It's not just that he's repeating it over and over again. He's got members of his cabinet repeating it over and over again. He's got members of the Republican Party repeating this over and over again. I mean, this is not him standing alone saying this stuff.
Uh-huh.
He's getting other people to also repeat this message, to reinforce this message. I mean,
but those are the people around whom are otherwise ciphers, Jeffrey, because he won't let them in the cabinet unless they do a Rorschach tech and he gets down and he kisses the emperor's foot, like happened to the Chinese several centuries ago. So the only people that he permits in his cabinet are people who suck up to him, basically are completely acolytes, sycophants, who will have no check whatsoever. And if they even gurgle something wrong, he kicks them out or demotes them or sends them to the equivalent of Siberia, maybe Butte, Montana. And it's very clear, and I have some sources who deal in that atmospherics in the Oval Office said, there's zero pushback, no adult in the living room. And they accept the fact that he may give you assignment to do A on day one, and the next day he tells you to do the opposite. No pushback, no criticism. Well, wait a minute, why are you changing your mind? Nothing. It's just 100% Trump and nothing else decides anything. That's why you'll see the recent articles about Tulsi Gabbard may leave soon. She's the director of national intelligence. She's fenced out of all these highly sensitive national security decisions. Her voice doesn't matter. There's only one voice that matters, Donald Trump. And he says openly, I don't listen to anybody else. I just listen to my instincts. I just decide, say something. That's the beginning and the end. Congress doesn't come into play. Nothing comes into play. And this guy is not James Madison. No, he hardly can speak at a level of a first grader. And we know that he's totally about narcissism in himself. And that's why he puts his name on everything that he sees. And maybe even things that he can't see. Maybe he'll have Trump on the moon or whatever. I'm sure that the people that Elon Musk has promised to cause, Mars to be coated with Trump signs if we ever get to Mars. If this isn't derangement, the term has lost all meaning.
Yes, and this is why, I mean, this is I think in my almost 70 years on the planet now, I think very little has shocked me as much as, I mean, I could never have imagined witnessing America like this.
Yeah.
You know, and, you expect that you'd have, people who occupy, who like a lot of power, who are going to look to extend executive authority as much as they can, probe the limits of it, but not this. The Constitution doesn't even exist anymore, because the only thing I have to appeal to is my own conscience.
Yeah.
And I don't know what other president would say, I'm going to war with you because, you didn't give me the prize I felt I deserved. So, I mean, how pathetic is it that people will repeat this? How pathetic is it that people find this acceptable? And some people do say, that this is what they voted for. Yeah, I'm sure there are people who voted for this, but the same people will be outraged if another majority votes for somebody like an AOC, and if AOC says, I'm the ultimate authority, the people who say I want Trump to be an elected despot are not going to support her being elected despot, but they don't really care. It's like, they got what they want. They're happy, and because they got what they want, and maybe they'll assume they'll have it forever, and so they're not worried about what happens if somebody else exercises that type of power, because they'll assume somebody will stop them, who are not stopping Trump. This is just so appalling. At what point, we're sitting back, why are we making such a farce of this anniversary of the 250th year? Why are we making such a farce of it? We shouldn't. No, we shouldn't talk about 250 and have any celebration of anything. If we don't give this any meaning, if we want to give 250 years of meaning to the Declaration of Independence, to the founding of our nation, very, very simple. We can do it by actions, not words. We can defund ICE. We can impeach Trump. If we really want to show that we respect, we respect and we want to commemorate and celebrate our founding, rather than repudiate it. It seems to me that those are the two tangible ways of honoring that document. And if we don't do that, we're dishonoring the document.
Well, it's not only dishonoring, and it's counter-revolution against the document. I would just add, I think it's important that impeachment goes forward. The reasons have to be very clear. I call it similar to the English Bill of Rights of 1688, because it's just not a Trump phenomenon. It builds on a very, very long series of executive usurpations stemming at least back to Harry Truman's unconstitutional war in Korea that took us to the brink of a nuclear bombing of China and 3 million Chinese soldiers. And so we have to do it with a rededication to constitutional and principles, with the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence that says not only does Trump go, but give a warning, no other president's going to get away with this either. It isn't just a Trump phenomenon. I say it's a degradation and decay of our intellectual and philosophical underpinnings as a country. And that's very, very important. But I do think that this is, in my view, 2026 is going to be a decisive year. Either the center is going to hold and we'll finally understand how recklessly we've abandoned the Constitution and Declaration, or the whole thing is going to fall apart. We may have a series of concentric secessions. The country will become unglued. We may be at war with who knows who. Maybe we'll be at war with all 31 NATO members when we attack Greenland, because Mr. Trump didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. Anything, something like that. But I do think we're come to a testing point here, where we decide, whether we're going to remain the United States of America or simply dissolve.
Yeah. And we can't undo the past. So because we didn't impeach Obama, because we didn't impeach Bush, because we didn't impeach, Biden, does not mean we should never impeach any president ever again in the future. Okay,
Right.
that's a logical fallacy. Okay,
it does, but I do
there's
think
no obligation because we've made a bunch of mistakes over and over again. That doesn't make an obligation is that we now we're obligated to make that mistake in perpetuity. That's just logical fallacy.
I agree, Jeffrey. I would just add, however, that we should acknowledge that we made mistakes in the past. We shouldn't pretend that these other presidents were squeaky clean. They weren't. And that's just being, intellectually honest. And because there is, in some element, there is an equal protection issue. Well, others got away with it. Why does Trump? I don't think it's persuasive. It's better to have some justice than none. But we got to be honest here. We've let presidents get away with murder, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, all sorts of violations, after 9/11 with waterboarding, torture, illegal invasions of Iraq, Somalia, any place.
Let me tell you, I'd be on board, and then we'll let Ryan speak because he's joined. But I would be on board with this. Let's impeach Trump. Let's go back and let's impeach every other living president and take away their pension, take away their Secret Service, take away all the privileges they have associated with being a former president by saying they don't have the right to call themselves a former president because they should have been impeached. Now, to the extent that the Constitution permits someone to retroactively impeach somebody, I'm not sure about that. Bruce, you might be able to say better. But if we want to be just, we should probably impeach them all and take away every perk and privileges they have for being president because they don't deserve it, because they all violated their oath of office, so should not enjoy any privilege that comes with that oath of office that they defiled.
Yeah, I agree with the broader point, but I think the best way, and like the sentiment in general, I agree. We both agree on that. I think as far back as you can look, I think it's blatant criminal activity. But to make this possible going forward, I think it's important to kind of find that middle ground and frame it in a way that is, because like Bruce said, I mean, you understand the argument, but it doesn't mean it's logical to not hold people accountable because of past examples. But is to go after the current president for clear crimes, but then if there is a legal pathway and, make this some kind of broad legislative outline that, basically going back through past presidential actions, if there's still an opening, right? If there's a limitation on, how far back it goes and so on, that go after people that we literally can. Now, there'll be a whole problem with that, but at least laying it out to be any president from any side going back as far as we're able to investigate. But what I think is important is that right now, and this is where the ploy is being played more than we've seen in the past. Elon Musk and others are continually hyping this kind of argument that if we don't do something, Robbie Starbuck was going off yesterday about Insurrection Act and literally using the military to round up every Democrat politician like crazy kind of stuff, that if they don't do something now to go after all of the extreme crazy Democrats that will always go as hard as they can, then they'll do it to us next, right? And so their argument is finding, purchase in people's minds that this is, even though it's wrong, this is what we keep talking about, right? Doing the wrong thing, to push back the other wrong thing, that even though it's wrong, we have to stop them because they'll do it to us if they gain power. And they're showing a bunch of videos of Democrats on mainstream media simply going, they committed crimes, we have to hold them accountable. And I'm like, it's the point we're making. It's like, well, how is that what you're framing it as? But it's become this mental game that they think they're fighting the most evil villain, deep state, whatever hyperbolic narrative they're framing as, So what we're saying has to be the only path forward is that you have to find some legal pathway to hold everybody accountable you possibly can. But how in the world do you accomplish that in this political?
No, but I mean, at least as legally under the Constitution, you can impeach those who have left office. In fact, the second impeachment trial of Trump was after he left office because there is disqualification of ever holding any office under trust of the United States afterwards. So it's not just a meaningless gesture, removing security clearances.
Can I say one thing, Bruce, really quickly to that? What I was really trying to say is not so much the impeachment, because I'm always so frustrated by the idea of removing somebody from office, but like that's enough. Like when somebody commits a crime, it's only people in power that get to like back away from their job and act like that's enough, right? It's like they should go to prison for crimes, And so my point is, aside from impeachment, which should be part of it too, Just go after criminal activity we can find, illegal bombing of foreign countries or whatever it is, and find a legal pathway for those specific crimes. That's kind of what I was saying, but I do agree with what you meant.
No, I understand. The difficulty on that score is typically there's a 5-year statute of limitations.
Right.
And you can see the difficulty of getting some of the evidence would be very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in addition to holding them accountable, and I've been trying for over 10 years, there needs to be a resolution that identifies various activities that Congress declares will be impeachable offenses. We're giving you a warning. Don't tell me that we didn't warn you. And I itemized all the ones: the usurpation of the war power, the usurpation of the treaty power, the power of the purse, failing to faithfully execute the laws, running secret government, things like that. So that now we have a consensus understanding of what impeachable offenses are. It's not we don't like you for the today, or it's some partisan conclusion. And that is a way, and I would hope that we can use the Trump experience to then go forward with this resolution of impeachable offenses.
I like that.
So that at least we don't go back and then we run into the same problem with a different personality, on the next occasion, because we know that it's inherent in the political species that it attracts sociopaths. It attracts people who love and crave power in the center of attention just for its own sake. Now, some are more flamboyant than others. I mean, Trump is at a class of himself, but Biden is in that same category, in my view. Why he would cling to running for office when he's clearly almost in his grave and pardon his son. I mean, it all ends up being the same. We have one George Washington. We'll never get another George Washington in 1,000 years. It's not going to happen. We're going to get others who will be very, very morally imperfect. And we have to plan that will be the norm. And we need to put the guardrails there to say, if you do X, we're going to impeach and remove you from office. That's where we need to get back to.
Well, if we accomplish that, Bruce, and I think we need to accomplish that, I think it's an imperative that we accomplish that. Then when we might change the motivation of who actually runs for president.
Yeah. Because
if the type of person who runs for president wants to behave like Trump, if it's the credible threat that they're likely to end up impeached, and even worse, impeached and imprisoned, that would deter a lot of really bad actors for seeking the presidency, or it might deter how a really bad actor actually behaves once they have the office, because they will view their removal, as a very credible threat. Now, it would be more powerful if they can not only be removed from office, but if they could be removed from society by being imprisoned. And I think the decision that the Supreme Court made is a horrible decision, and it's a decision that that basically provides a reward for bad actors, in the sense that they'll get the upside without any threat of downside, which is really perverse incentives. And you would assume that these are reasonably intelligent people that know better, and that what makes it worse. They didn't do this out of a lack of understanding, out of stupidity, as a lack of foresight. These are people who did this with their eyes wide open, and this is what they did, and in my opinion, to protect a single person. And so this person could continue to have the opportunity of executing his cultural war to win back America, to make it great again. So, and they were willing to shred the Constitution in doing so. I mean, I don't have a better reason, because they're not stupid people. So maybe you have a better explanation.
I still don't think that what they're trying to do from Trump's perspective, or rather at least the people who are guiding him financially and otherwise, are to make this country great again. I think what their entire everything's built on right now is floating. Like last night, my framing on my show was about the bait and switch, framing the idea of what we want as what they're presenting when it's sort of a rug pull, and whatever that, we can all debate about what we think their intentions are. Nobody can know for sure. It's in their mind. But it's I think it's self-evident that they're not doing what they said they were going to do. They're claiming that while doing something else. That's what a lot of Republicans are grappling with, So it's about trying to find out what the larger agenda is, but that gets much more difficult to define. That's why it's important just to, lean into what we can prove, which is they're lying. They're breaking the law. Kristi Noem can stand up there and repeatedly say that you have to prove your citizenship when literally everybody knows that's not true. It's this confounding moment. I honestly don't know why that's happening the way it is. Why would they be so blatantly dishonest in front of everybody? That's something we should be asking. But back to the impeachment point, how is it possible you can have such blatant criminal activity, statements of falsehood, and then carrying it out in a illegal sense in the world, and then having no immediate action? I think you briefly mentioned. I think it's kind of another feigned effort. Impeachment, I'm forgetting the guy's name. There has been floated moments of impeachment claims and stuff, but nothing's really happening. Even with Noem and the others, they keep saying it, but I think it's designed to fail.
You're probably referring to Al Green.
Yes, Green. Thank you.
In his impeachment resolutions. Well, I think the reason why they tell the lies is because they get away with it. They live in a fantasy world. The lies. Well, all the immigrants that we're deporting are criminals, where it's only a tiny fraction of them are criminals. We already know that they're illegal, and they're using bogus investigations to even deport citizens. No, citizens don't have an obligation. Citizens are not presumed to be aliens unless otherwise. The burden is on the government, to show that there is some reasonable suspicion, probable cause to believe they're here illegally. And that's why before you came, Ryan, I said we've got to have Congress to create new damage. They got to change the incentive structure for the ICE agents. Tell them an ICE agent violates your constitutional rights, you can sue them for damages, double damages, triple damages. And if the ICE agent loses, he loses his job. You got to make clear that we want them to be scrupulous in complying with the law. No good faith defenses, no government come in and pay your attorney's fees, things of that sort. If you gather evidence illegally, it's not going to be usable in a deportation proceeding. Things like that, I believe, are essential here if we're going to get the government back into any kind of lawful track. But I repeat, even the craziest things that are said, like Miss Good's killing, where you can see it on the video. Right. She's turning away. Now, even if she did something wrong,
right,
you're not entitled to shoot and kill somebody because you think they trespassed, violated a law. That's not how it works. Nobody's life was in imminent danger. In fact, Mr. Ross, who shot and killed the lady, murdered the lady, was creating a danger himself. She's driving a car. Now you have a dead person in it. Who's going to control the car? Could have hurt somebody else. Anyway, but the incentives right now are all in favor of abusing our rights. Right. We need to flip that on its head.
On the incentive point, the Wall Street Journal just reported that there's these agents. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen the lack of training. Even their claim now that there was an AI mistake and they put out people that had no training at all, by the way. I'm sure you guys have seen that. But the idea being that Wall Street Journal just reported that they're getting incentives. So if they bring back somebody who turns out to not be an illegal immigrant and they release them, they still benefit from that. So they're literally given a profit motive to scoop up as many people as they can, which is what everybody honest can clearly see happening, So that's clearly coming from the administration, right? I just doubt that they're even going to get pushback from Democrats in Congress who have, spoken out against this, but I don't think they're going to do anything about it.
That's why, Ryan, I started off this this podcast today with my statement that, and I've written it on my X account. With a very specific list. Bruce also provided his very specific list of things because Congress is very good at saying a lot of things that mean nothing and doing things that are just cosmetic and performative in nature, but lack complete substance. So my appeal is that the likelihood of impeaching, the likelihood of getting articles of impeachment against Trump in Congress is possible in the House. He'll never be convicted in the Senate. So it's probably, a complete waste of time to impeach him. Even though it might not be a waste of time if there's actual hearings where people can get the facts out and the American people can listen to the argument on why he should be impeached. And maybe that's a worthwhile exercise in and of itself. But January 30th is another deadline for funding government. And I think right now, Democrats, along with a few Republicans, should consent to, shut down government if government's going to continue to operate, let ICE operate with this type of impunity. There's no member of Congress who should be accepting funding these activities. So, the government doesn't need to pass all these non-binding, unenforceable resolutions. Is just a complete waste of time, and it's just complete bullshit. Okay, what they can do is very simple. All the people who were offended by worrying about Trump is going to attack Iran again, that he's going to attack Greenland, that he's going to go and do even more against Venezuela, that don't like to see the videos of these abuses of that ICE is doing. It's just very simple. All they need to do is when they reach to the budget process, they say, we're not funding this anymore. Okay, we'll only write a check if you're bound to understand nothing for Venezuela, nothing for Iran, nothing for Greenland. You have to significantly reform ICE, and there's a bunch out there who say, we'll take a stand on this issue, and we'll let the American people decide, do they want the government funded and let Trump do all these things, or do they want to stop it? The polls seem to indicate that Trump does not have the public support for attacking Iran, for attacking Venezuela, for treating, he has support for removing, illegals, that are real violent criminals. But this type of mass deportations with the complete disrespect for due process, and actually now going after citizens, and now declaring a citizen who's an observer is a felon. So he's extended the boundaries of what it seems like the majority of Americans seem to think is inappropriate. So given that's the case, I don't know a better moment for people to sit back and say, we can be more than just empty words, that we can actually do something. Now, I think it'll require people writing in, which is what I've appealed, which is why I wrote with a list and saying, we have your back if you shut down the government over this. I think if people, this is why ultimately I blame it on us. If people care enough, right now people care enough by they produce social media content, they complain, whatever. They spend a lot of time. It takes 5 minutes a day to sit and say every day between now and the 30th to go and write every member, every elected representative who represents you, and saying, you're not going to have my vote, you're not going to have my support. Now is the moment. And if they get 50 million letters like that, 50 million appeals like that, and apparently there are 50 million people who don't support this, okay, there is a chance that this will get defunded. Okay, there is a chance that Trump will have heard from the people, and he might not like what he hears. He would not like to ignore it, but he won't be able to ignore it if the people make themselves heard. The problem is people don't make themselves heard. They whine, they complain, they bitch, okay, but they do it not in a way that they can actually change something, when they can take all that energy and do something that can actually change something.
Yeah, to reinforce what you've said, think about the Epstein files. They got 218 discharge petition. It passed unanimously. Trump was all against it until he became for it, because Congress was responding to the popular will, if you will. And there was a lot of information, a lot of campaigning, and voices were heard. It was 427-1 in the House, unanimous in the Senate. I go back earlier on Syria and Obama in 2013. He said, well, I think there's chemical weapons used in Syria. I want a declaration of war. The American people said, no way. They went in and communicated that to Congress. Congress didn't even let a bill out of committee that would have authorized war against Syria. So the system still works if you actually have the public awakened to their duties, and if their voice is resonated in the Congress. Congress does respond. They're not stupid. They want to get reelected. So I don't think there should this idea of despair. It doesn't matter how overwhelming the people are about one view or another. We have actual experience showing the force of popular opinion.
I would argue that, I mean, first of all, I agree with everything you're saying. And like I say with protesting, I feel that all of things are important and absolutely do have an effect. But I with protesting, for example, I just don't think it has the effect that it might have once had. If it, it's easily ignored by people in power. And same thing I would argue about writing. Like, I think it's important. I think we should be doing that. But I would argue the more effective direction would be to aim at the people who are striving to become larger in politics. You take advantage of the opportunism of the entire other group. I think people like Trump or Marjorie Greene or anybody at this level, I honestly don't think they're that swayed by public opinion, because I'm of the mind that I don't think they actually have, that our vote, our influence doesn't have that much effect on them. That's just my personal opinion, which I'm sure people disagree with. What I think is interesting is going to Epstein, for example, right? So yes, I agree with you. There's great momentum there. A lot happened, but then what happened now? Well, at this point, they've released 1% of the documents, and they seem to be arguing that there's no standing to push them any further. So yes, we can get them momentum, but then they can go screw off, and I'm not trying to say that we should not. Trust me, I'm on your side. I think we need to do it, even if it's not having an effect, because we should. But we have to address a different problem, that there's this corruption of power at the top where ultimately, like you're saying, Bruce, that they're able with the Supreme Court rulings or anything else just to go, we don't care. And then if Congress doesn't do anything, then nothing happens. And we've come to this point many times in this show. And what you say, I agree with. Education needs to continue. People need to speak up, send every possible letter you can. But if we do that and they still look at it, shrug their shoulders and keep going, what's the answer there? Like, there needs to be another conversation about how we address that problem while still doing everything you guys just discussed, because it is important. If you get what I'm saying.
But I think the ultimate guardrail is impeachment and removal from office. It's not criminal. You don't go to Siberia. And if Congress is not willing to go that route, you might call it the nuclear option. The executive's not stupid. They say, what do we care? We just do whatever we want. Now, I do think on Epstein files, though, although there's been resistance, it has an impact, because you got about half of the Department of Justice is involved in reviewing these files. And so that means they can't do a whole lot of other things, including various prosecutions that are probably vastly more important. But they are trying to comply, I think, in part because they feel that the public is behind the Congress. And I know that Congressman Massey and Khanna submitted an amicus brief to the court saying, hey, listen, you need to have a special master look at this stuff. We don't trust the department to properly classify information or not.
They just denied that.
Follow up. But ultimately, you are correct, Ryan, in that if you're not willing to ultimately draw the line and say, we're going to impeach and remove you from office, the executive branch can do anything they want. They can violate court orders. The court doesn't have any doesn't have the power of the purse, doesn't have the sword either, doesn't have marshals who are going to go out and arrest anybody. And I keep repeating, if Congress stands up to the plate once and says you're gone, they won't have to do it another 100 years, because people like to stay in power. It's as Jeffrey was saying, when they get the message, hey, we're going to risk our office if we do X, they're not going to do it, because they love and crave power.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that. How do we get there, though? Like, how do we get that fear in them? Because Congress seems to be completely willing to let it keep going. There must be another way around that. Think outside the box. Like, in weird situations, there's been like an illegal sense from people's personal situations, in a citizen's arrest kind of a thing. Like, is there another way around what's happening in that kind of avenue? I don't know. I mean, I'm not that versed on it, but I think there has to be another path if they're just simply sitting on their hands.
Well, the past is they lose their offices. They get and this happened in 1974. Virtually all those who tried to defend President Nixon up to the 11th hour, they lost their seats. They are crushing loss in 1974 for the Republicans. So ultimately, that's how it comes. And if that has to go that far, and somebody is unwilling to change their view if they're an incumbent, because that was ultimately what Benjamin Franklin said when he entered. He left the convention after the Constitution was ratified and says, "We have a republic if you can keep it." Who is going to keep it? It's us. Mm-hmm. Everybody who's on this program, all citizens of the United States. If there isn't that popular consensus and at least willing to take some risk, it's not going to work on cruise control.
I was just saying that about your statement last night on my show, right? You know, the idea that they sign their death warrants, you know, and we have to be willing to, like, it came up in the protest point, you know, where people are even the leadership in Minnesota saying, like, don't come out and protest. And I'm just going, you know, that feels wrong. You know, don't go out and break the law. But at this moment, I think you have to go out and protest, but be willing to accept that there is risk from an illegitimate action from the government. But we have to, you know, I think that risk isn't, we have to take that risk, is my point.
Yeah, and it's not only for us, it's for our kids too, for posterity. You know, these principles live around long after we're going to pass away. And that's why the United States was different. I mean, take Great Britain, all the rights that they ever had. No, they weren't unalienable rights. The king gave a little bit, you know, after you had the Charles the first was beheaded, and they grudgingly took rights. We're the only country in the world that stood up and was born on the idea everybody has inherent unalienable rights because they're a human being. It's not given to them by a king or a queen or anybody who's a saint. And that's what's made the United States so attractive to everybody around the world. That's why immigrants came here. It was a thrilling idea. You know, we work on the basis of merit. And we can't give that up. Otherwise, you know, the world's going to destroy itself. We're the last best hope, as Abe Lincoln said. And if it's not us, it's not going to be anybody else.
That's why I insist that, you know, we got to look at tangible things. And January 30th, this is something that's worth having the government shut down for. Yeah. And the Democrats are revealing themselves. If they don't do that, they'll reveal their words as empty. And they still also, going back to Brian's point is they still might get away with it because they come to polls and said, yeah, people think we're full of shit, but we're still not as bad as the Republicans. So we're the lesser evil. Not that we're good, but we're the lesser evil, and people will vote for the lesser evil. They might not be happy with us, but they'll still prefer the lesser evil to the greater evil. That's very sad, and it's probable. I would say that's probably probable, and it's sad, but that doesn't mean you put the effort into it. That's why ultimately I get back to the same point I repeated already a number of times. I think we got to neuter government to the extent that's in our power to do. And where we have absolute power is when we sit on grand juries, you know, and you know, and if we're impaneled, you know, for a grand jury, and if we're paneled for a jury, there we have absolute uncontestable power. Okay, and that absolute uncontestable power, we need to start using. Okay, we need to make sure that the government implements and executes justice. Okay, justice. That's the end of government. Okay, if the founders were not, when they created this country, saying let's write this legalistic type of stuff so we can basically let people behave unjust and get away with it. Okay, this was not their intention of the documents, and Alito knows that. Thomas knows that. Every asshole on the Supreme Court, they really understand that. They really understand they're not to look at the text and look to arbitrage the text and play verbal games because they're clever and they know linguistics well. They got to think about everything and said, what would James Madison do? And are we doing justice? Okay, that's the test. That's the standard. They know they're not. I don't believe any member on the Supreme Court really believes they're doing justice. I don't. So I certainly believe. I probably have philosophical opinion differences with the liberal members on the court, okay? But with the conservative members on the court, I can't believe any one of them actually believe that when they write their opinions that they really think they're doing justice, okay? I don't, okay? I know that I don't believe they think they're faithful to Madison, and I don't believe they think they're doing justice, okay? Disgusting, okay? So we need to take matters in our own hands. And again, not through violence. One place we have absolute power is when we're on a grand jury, when we're on a jury. Absolute, uncontestable power. Okay.
You're talking about nullification, yeah?
Yep. Through nullification.
Okay, Jeffrey, you I don't know if you want to get into this because I know you know it's something you're writing and so on, but you make the point before about justice versus law, and I think this is obviously the kind of point you're making right now, and I think that's a very important, potent point for where we are. You know, that just because something is law does not even make it legal. and which may seem confusing to some people, but realizing, that the Congress and people in power can pass a law that completely violates the Constitution, and that's technically we've spoken about should make that, null and void. But either way, with all of that, the idea being that like you pointed out, that it's the end point is not about just adhering to the dictate, but actually serving justice. I think that was a very well-made point by you. I mean, I just think that's worth getting into if you wanted to.
Yes,
I think I would insist, and Bruce might feel different, but let me just say something, and then Bruce can contend. I would contend that that's the reason why the last word was left with the people and juries. I don't think, at the end, I think people like Jefferson, when they said, who do I trust is likely to do more justice? Will it be the people in Washington? Will it be the people in the government? Or ultimately the people themselves? And so I think part of the genius of our system of jury trials is that ultimately the goal of the jury is to do justice. Okay. And I think somebody like Jefferson, maybe even Madison, would understand the concept that if the law is unjust, if there's a persecution, that the reason why they left the final power to preserving liberty is in the hands of the people. So Bruce might have a different opinion on that.
I basically want to supplement it. It's Madison in Federalist 51 when he says, justice is the end of government. It's the end of civil society. Right. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances listed is for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. That's in the Declaration of Independence. They subject the colonists to maritime jurisdiction, so they couldn't get the benefit of the jury because they worried precisely what you and Ryan are saying, that they'd get justice rather than law. And the issue that the drawing the distinction between justice and law is one that we encountered at least head on with regard to the Third Reich and Nuremberg. We had concluded at Nuremberg and amongst other jurisdictions that the Nuremberg laws that basically dehumanized Jews was not even a law, even though it passed through all the formal structures that you needed to reach that threshold of legality in Nazi Germany. It was so morally abhorrent. It didn't satisfy the minimum level of morality to justify being a law. And that is a very, very important distinction to make. It's a little bit like the principle in military jurisprudence that a soldier is obligated to disobey a clearly illegal order. Even though ordinarily, you salute your commander, if it's a clearly illegal order, you have a duty to disobey. So when Lieutenant Cowley in Vietnam says, shoot all those women and children in a ditch, and they did, he didn't have that was not a defense, and he didn't have a defense to say, well, I'm just following orders. It's clearly illegal and had no moral foundation. And it's sometimes delicate as to where you've gone too far, where you haven't gone too far. There can be hard cases, but right now we are not witnessing hard cases. You do not kill somebody, shoot somebody, because they're for jaywalking, because they may be trespassing, because they're exercising their First Amendment rights that you may not like, or even they're using drugs. You don't pick up an AK-47 and kill them. They have a right to a trial. Even the Nuremberg defendants, the Nazi leadership after the war got trials. That's what it means to treat human beings with dignity. You could get it wrong. But ultimately, if there's tension between justice and law, oftentimes there is not. But if there is, justice prevails. That's what Madison wrote in Federalist 51. And the way in which justice prevails, in part, is through the jury system that you and Ryan have described.
Hey, Jeffrey, would you bring up this picture I just put in there? It's just humorous in the light of what we're discussing. I think it's a Newsweek article discussing what ICE agents are saying, that they're complaining about Nazi comparisons while saying, hey, they're just enforcing the laws. I just think that's perfect. It's like, hey, that's exactly the point, isn't it? That's the Nuremberg discussion. I just think that it's perfect where we are. I think it's because they actually just don't understand that that's what they're doing right there, but it's perfect where we are.
But I also think, Jeffrey and Ryan, that the kinds of people who get recruited to ICE, they're trying to have a big hiring surge. you're recruiting people who are more likely to be ruthless. Who would want it? If you had any sense of decency, you wouldn't want to be in the business of throwing people who are law-abiding and contributing to society through these very, very cruel, I believe, and brutal methods. And so you pointing out the AI, they're not even training them to understand what the law is, and that's finds expression in the kinds of persons who end up working for ICE.
I would go further, Bruce. I would say that's intentional. The intention is to be cruel and brutal because they believe that's the mentality. If you think about the way Trump expresses himself, the way Noam has expressed herself, if Trump wasn't who he was, Noam might be speaking differently. Who knows? But and going back to Ryan's early comment, I want to remind people, what is the Trump philosophy? Trump philosophy is articulated and systematized by Roy Cohen, is easily 3 points: attack, 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 admit nothing and deny everything, and no matter what happens, claim victory. So you have to understand that is Trump. Okay. Yeah. And if you want to work for Trump in this administration, okay, you have to embrace that. You have to embrace the attitude of attack, 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 admit nothing, deny everything, no matter what happens, claim victory. And if you watch the pattern of the behavior, whether it's the spokesperson for DHS, whether it's a spokesperson for the White House, whether it's Noam, whether it's Bessent, however, I don't want to, I mispronounce his name, Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, Trump, Bondi, all of them embrace that approach. Okay, some have been less public in the media because probably they don't want to justify what's going on, so they're in hiding. But those that are willing to speak up, they're speaking up, they're signaling to Trump, okay, I'm someone you can count on. I got this. I understand. I'm always in this mode, applying these basic principles of communication. So for me, the explanation is not complicated. It's very simple. This is who Trump is. You want to be in his good graces. It's a necessary requirement. It's not sufficient, but it's a necessary condition, just not a sufficient condition, to remain in his good graces. Because you have to do this and plus be effective at it. So if you just do it and you're ineffective, then you're a problem. So, and then you're not in his good graces. So, you have to be, effective at doing this. So I think that to me explains, the type of words that we see. But yeah, this is a person who is a bully. He likes to act through intimidation. He wants to be cruel, and he thinks the greatest deterrent is show cruelty, instill fear, and you'll get people to just be obedient. And that's what he wants. He wants obedience. Okay. And how do you get obedience? Through force. He can't get it through reason. Okay. He's not convincing people. Okay. So he can't appeal through reason. So his only alternative is to appeal through force. And this is a person throughout his life, that's always been his first option. It's not his second or third or final option. His first option has been violence, okay, in some form or another. So whether it's a lawsuit or through other ways, this is someone that applies, his own form, of violence. So this is not I don't believe this is an accident, Bruce. This is the type of people they want, and they've already basically said everyone who's out there in the field, as Ryan pointed out, they're getting financial rewards, okay? They're getting rewards independent of whether they pick up innocent or guilty people. They don't care as long as they're picking people up, which means they only want to, it's a reign of terror. Define terror. Look at the definition of what's terror. This is a reign of terror, okay? He's at war, he's committing terror against American citizens, okay? There's no other way to call it. And Congress, really, how pathetic are they that they have almost nothing to say about this? And the type of words they use, are not proportional to the evil that's going on. They're just so disproportional, to actually what people are experiencing, what people are living. And see these videos and the type of words people use, just noise. It's pathetic it's just really, really, really pathetic.
You guys might find this interesting. Ken Klippenstein was leaked some documents. This came out, I think, yesterday, the day before, which kind of speaking to the point we're all discussing about ICE and the hiring and just, I think it was down to 45 days, came out before about how long they're being trained. It's like, I agree with you, Jeffrey. I think it's actually a means to create also an excuse, right, to kind of explain away why it might be so crazy, but also just to, get the people willing to do the worst of the duty for, nothing basically. But that he was leaked documents that showed that because of what's going on, you might think that this would drive more people to drive into it, but it turns out that more people are now going, I don't want any part of that. And it turns out that within their internal documents, he was leaked. They're now putting out memos and to their different groups going, please we need volunteers because we basically can't fill the positions. And it's just basically being shown that even within their own, like Border Patrol has been speaking up about what ICE is doing and leaking information about these secret programs they have because they're claiming they're not okay with what's happening. What I think it shows is what we're discussing, that there are a lot of people within these industries or these institutions who believe in what they're doing, even maybe with a larger agenda, but do not agree with the way they're executing it, which shows what we're talking about, right? That there may be a different disagreement on politics, but we all can at least agree what they frame it as, that we're fighting for the Constitution, for liberty, for saving the country. And so what they do is breaking that, even if it's with the intention of breaking it to bring it back. So many people within their own team are not okay with it right now, even people within ICE. And I just think that's a positive note, but it doesn't mean they're not going to go out and find even less trained people who are willing to go do anything for anything. That's kind of the AI point, saying that I don't know if you saw that, but they're saying that they did an AI search for officer and accidentally ended up sweeping in people that were simply saying they wanted to become an ICE officer and put them right on the front lines. It's not a joke. That's what they're claiming. It's insane.
No, but what are you pointing out, I think, Ryan, in different words, is they care about process. They understand goals, but, civilized people have certain processes. You can get it wrong. There are ways in which you can enforce the law that's short of shooting people that you don't like.
The ends don't
short of rummaging through and detaining them without any evidence whatsoever. And I think that's a healthy sign. And it's not, I don't think, just at ICE. I know thousands have quit at the Justice Department because they're unwilling to use the legal system for purely partisan, vengeful purposes when there's no evidence there. I mean, I think that one thing that's encouraging is the way in which there's been strong pushback about investigating Jerome Powell, allegedly cost overrun on renovating, the Fed is, we got a new ballroom, 300, 400, 500 million. The cost overruns at DOD, every weapon system is up to trillions of dollars. And does anybody really think that the worry Mr. Trump has with Jerome Powell is he spent for curtains that he didn't need? I mean, you go into the Oval Office today, it looks like the Palace of Versailles. Really? So we know this is a joke, but there is pushback because it's obvious that these people are using the law not to achieve justice, but basically exercise, a political vendetta, because all power has to go to Mr. Trump. As simple as that. And I do, however, think get off of Trump. He has many of similar characteristics of Lyndon Johnson. I guess many others who were president, but Johnson also had this idea, that he wanted cruel, he wanted to humiliate people. He had to have all the power. You can't criticize him on Vietnam. He humiliated Hubert Humphrey. To bring up LBJ just to show that Trump is not a freak when it comes to having this megalomaniac personality in the White House. Other presidents have exercised it, which is exactly why we need checks and balances, separation of powers. We can't trust them to do the right thing. Politics, again, it attracts peoples who typically are psychologically imbalanced, and they crave power for its own sake. How else can you describe Mr. Trump's statement, I need Greenland because if I own something, I feel better than if I have it by a treaty or a lease or something like that. I just feel psychologically serene when I have all power in my grasp. I mean, that is
very simple. Very simple. Again, going back to Trump, I don't want to answer to anyone. Okay. So I want absolute power. So this all reinforces who he is. Okay. Yeah. He wants to have control over it. Okay. That's the mentality. He needs to own it. He needs to control it. He needs it to be absolute. Okay. And all the words he says reinforces that. Almost no words does he ever choose recognizes a system of checks and balances, is him as a servant of the people, subject to constitutional constraints. Okay. Almost no words come out of his mouth demonstrating any understanding of that whatsoever. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is who he is. Okay. And he'll keep saying this and keep looking to act on it until he gets pushback. He does respond to pushback to some extent, but again, going back to Ryan's point, again, he did agree to release the Epstein files, but now they're not releasing it. Okay, so he did one release. Okay, gave a whole bunch of excuses. He's going to court, basically people saying people don't have standing to challenge the way he's releasing the documents. That's what he's basically said. I'm releasing them the way I want to release them. And you, the courts, can't give an opinion on it. And you, Congress, you can't do anything about it. Nobody can, okay? This is my discretion to release them the way I want to release them. So I don't care what law I signed. This is my interpretation of the law. And nobody else has the right to make an alternative interpretation. It's not subject to judicial review. It's not subject to congressional oversight or commentary. Okay, that's the substance of the argument he's presented to the courts. So
the level of blind, people that will just repeat what he says. Like right now, you got every ice agent in the world on video going 18. 18 C through 111. They just keep. If you look it up, it no way meets what they keep claiming. But people repeat it. It just is infuriating to me how often that happens. Well, they'll lay something out, whether it's Noble or Bonnie, and then it just ripples through the conversation, and it's just completely incorrect. Kills me because then you have to wait.
But there's some. I think there's some positive signs. That the courts have basically said, and Trump has withdrawn the National Guard postings in Portland and Los Angeles and Chicago, and he has not. And he is not yet. He's threatened. But I feel that he's nervous about invoking the Insurrection Act. Mm-hmm. I think he feels that he could get pushback and lose. It would show weakness. And once there's an appearance of weakness, then it becomes kind of a snowball effect. And then he's going to get pushed back a lot of other places. So I think there's at least some evidence that the heart of citizen rejection is still beating. There's still some level of decency out there. It's an issue of whether it can unify and push with enough brain power to defeat the despotism that we confront right now.
Yeah, I think that validates the point. If he can't get away with bullying, he will back down like any bully.
Yeah.
Okay. And right. So when people say, and I agree with you, Bruce, I don't know how Ryan feels about this, but I agree with you that I think he hasn't invoked it because I think he gets pushback. And if he loses in pushback, if he doesn't get away with it, he will appear weak. And if he appears weak, people then will exploit that weakness, not just here, they'll begin to exploit it elsewhere as well. So he keeps throwing it out as a threat. Hopefully people will take the threat seriously so he doesn't actually have to invoke it, and because if he knows if he attempts to invoke it, that he hasn't reached that threshold yet, to invoke it. And then if he loses, that would be the loss that he would not want to confront because of his appearances of weakness. What do you think, Ryan?
I do think. Let me know if I'm cutting out. By the way, I think I keep losing connection, but I do agree. I think that's a major factor for everything he does. I mean, the way he's perceived and his hubris and narcissism run most of what he's doing, in my opinion. But I do think there's another factor. That I think we already saw this come out, right? We saw this with Venezuela. We saw this already. And I think that in a way blew up in his face. I think it's also about. I guess it's kind of the same point, but not so much. That fear is part of it. But I also think it's about the perception and the momentum of his base that if right now, I think he's grappling with people within his inner circle, conservatives becoming uncomfortable with what he's doing, becoming, too critical of, people that he's used to blindly following, starting to go, well, wait a minute, Epstein file, this is where. So I think these are moments where he's now is the juice worth the squeeze. If I'm going to execute this now, it can't be like last time. There has to be an airtight argument. There has to be an excuse, which is what I'm worried about, what they're trying to kind of manufacture with all that's happening in the States right now. But so I think it's both. And I think if they can effectively create a situation where there's enough momentum, like, some kind of an attack or some kind of an event that they can frame to drive people, like with like a 9/11 point, if there's enough momentum and narrative over the top, the arguments about what's legal and what should happen get drowned out. And that's history. We've seen that many times. So I think it's both of those right now.
And that plays into my point about what I believe the importance of January 30th. If government is shut down, and the public and the Republicans cave and decide that the people are on the side of reforming ICE, not letting ICE continue to behave this way, okay, that will emasculate Trump, okay? So that's why I think this is so important, that this got to take a stand, on this issue, because the issue is so compelling, and there's a tangible event where Congress can actually exercise its Article 1 powers and just say, we're not funding this. This is not the government we're funding. You got to remember, we're here. Every dollar you spend needs approval from us, needs agreement from us, needs authorization from us, needs consent from us. If they can take a stand now, I think this transforms the relationship between Congress and Trump, and what Trump will attempt to do going forward. Okay.
Yeah. To add to that, Jeffrey, and this may be what you're saying, is kind of what Bruce was saying before, is as opposed to making it, focus on Trump's ICE, because there'll be pushback irrationally just because it's framed as partisan, but to make like a larger document about any enforcement level from any administration going forward. Here are which we shouldn't have to do. There's already very clear laws in place, but to make that case about any of them, so it's applicable to any law enforcement and, in any administration.
Right. It's not unique to his ICE. It's unique to any.
No, that's what I'm saying. Then we agree. Yeah. I think that's very important, because you're going to get these people out there that make it about a partisan attack, and so I just think it's best to frame it as broad as possible. But that's what you're saying.
You can make arguments about what should be done that should be compelling to anybody who's an independent thinker and understands that these are not partisan ideas. That there needs to be, appropriate checks and balances into the system, and they need to exist, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's Harris, whether it's AOC, whether it's Bernie Sanders, whether it's J.D. Vance, that these are principles that just about anyone who has a limited open, whose mind is ajar, would find compelling.
Yeah, but I think that it could be broader than just shutting down the government over ICE. Why not think, why the heck are we spending money? Greenland, Venezuela, Colombia, they just did broad. And this is somebody who stands up and says, America first? America's nowhere. He says, where is America on this? Greenland's a long way away. Who cares about Venezuela or the North Solomon Islands and stuff like this? Trump's crazy. He says America first, and he says, well, I should get the Nobel Prize because I've solved war between Thailand and Cambodia, Ethiopia and Egypt, Armenia and Azerbaijan. People can't even find these places on the map. Now, Mr. Trump, you're supposed to be spending your time on putting America first. That doesn't look like America first. It looks like all you care about is a Nobel Peace Prize. It doesn't have anything to do with America. Yeah. So this is complete lunacy out there. It shows that we have a person who is a complete megalomaniac, right? All he cares about is just his own aggrandizement. He could care less about America or anybody, even his family. This guy is unique, I believe, maybe in the history of politics, that has no principles other than, I just need to be the center of attention. Let me do whatever I want. Afterwards, I don't care about anything. And I think that's transparent to anybody who's got open eyes, can see this. Yeah, now, I'm not in favor of listen, we just got to get rid of him. I don't have any desire to have him go to prison or anything like that. You can't occupy the corridors of power anymore. You're a danger to sacrificing all of the wisdom of our sacrifices going back to the Declaration of Independence for 250 years, Cemetery Ridge, Omaha Beach. You're all throwing out the window for one guy's megalomania? Forget it. We got 300 some million people in the United States. We need a symbol for the rest of the world. We shouldn't be bowing down to this one human being who's got many, many huge flaws.
I agree with everything, Bruce, except that I think there has to be legal accountability, because if you don't, it becomes the same cycle over and over, and then almost becomes all these crimes are committed and they just get to step back into the background, and that it becomes the cycle. I agree with you though. I think you got to start there, And I would say I agree with, from Jeffrey's point is I think it's better to start more focused. Broad becomes harder to enforce, but, I think people have to start going to jail. Otherwise it doesn't mean anything,
Yeah,
well, but I mean, it matters of degree. I don't think it's jail or nothing. Certainly that's a huge deterrent.
Mhm.
I think impeachment and losing power is a huge deal. I think that even though Nixon got pardoned, I think the message was sent. You had to leave office. You're subject to a grand jury, and you got the pardon. It was less deterrent, I agree, than if he actually went to trial and maybe pardon came afterwards. But there are degrees of deterrence, I believe.
I agree.
It shouldn't be just criminal or nothing.
Mhm.
And you deal whatever is is optimal at the particular political moment, in my judgment.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan's statement. You got to go it one step at a time. I ideally would like to be as broad as possible regarding shutting down the government, but the broader you make, the less likely you're going to succeed.
Right.
So, what's more important is to succeed on something limited than fail at something that's broader in nature. So I think you got to get a sense of what kind of coalition you could build and how far will that coalition go. Now, ideally, if the coalition would stop all this insanity with respect to Greenland, with respect to these tariffs, because you don't want to approve my takeover of Greenland, so I'm now putting a tariffs in you for that. So Congress should be reversing all that. They should be voting and saying every tariff Trump imposed because of a temper tantrum of people not taking his hostile takeover, we're repealing. Okay, so but you can see Congress is doing nothing about that, and it should be evident that they should be doing something about that. How can anybody justify the type of I want to go after Greenland because I didn't get a Nobel Prize, and if somebody doesn't support me, I'm going to impose tariffs on them. So why don't we start putting sanctions on them next? So I mean, it's so absurd. We have to, but clearly, if we were able to get some sort of peel off enough Republicans, who would vote with Democrats, and succeed at this, where ultimately the Republicans would cave because they see it's a losing issue. If it's a broader thing and the broader thing can be passed, I can tell you Trump becomes a lame duck immediately.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, the reason
it limits the insanity he can do elsewhere, because now Congress has said your insanity. Look in the mirror, say all the shit you want to say in front of yourself, but we're not going to have the U.S. backing up this insanity. Right now, every time he goes out and he speaks to everyone around the world, people will sit back and say, this is insane. But if the American people don't stop it, how do you expect me to stop something that the American people won't stop, that Congress won't stop, that the Supreme Court won't stop? Now you're putting me up against that. I even have less elements to stop it than they do, and they're not stopping it. Now think about the consequences if it is stopped. And he does call Starmer, and he calls Macron, and he calls all these people saying all this stuff. They're just going to see it as the rantings of a lunatic, okay? Because they know the U.S. is not behind this. Right now they think everything he says, the U.S. is behind it, and he can apply force at his discretion. If they take the gun away from him, okay, then if they take the gun away from him, they take the tariff away from him, he's disarmed, okay? And this is what Congress needs to do. They need to disarm him, okay? So, and that's all his weapons he's got. I can bomb Iran, I can bomb Venezuela, I can kidnap whoever I want and throw tariffs around according to my state of mind, and my own sense of my own morality. Okay. Once he's constrained by that, okay, he's roped in to basically being a constitutionally limited president. Okay. And then when other countries start negotiating with him, they recognize I'm negotiating with someone who threats I don't have to take very seriously anymore, because because Congress pulled away his ability to follow up on those threats unless they consent to it.
Yeah, but Jeffrey and Ryan, Jeffrey, let me just interject.
That's the ideal world.
I think that in some context, political context, I agree that the narrower, the easier to get through. But sometimes broader can be better because it depends upon the circumstances. And I think that there are a different category of people who oppose the ICE tactics as opposed wasting our resources and reputation in Greenland and in Venezuela and elsewhere. That's the only reason why I think they're worth considering putting in this package at January 30th when the funding comes up, because I think you could get a broader coalition by expanding it beyond ICE in the short run, where Trump is now trying to project the United States globally for his own personal purposes to win a Nobel Peace Prize. But ultimately, it's a political judgment as to whether you gain more or lose more by broadening the approach. The important thing I agree with is a victory. Any kind of victory over Trump is going to weaken him and is going to embolden the Congress to then push forward on other fronts. But I say the initial vote, it should be a political calculation. If you broaden it, are you going to gain more votes than lose? And that's got to be somebody at the very granular level.
That's a good point. I have a question for both of you about the tariff part of this. And this is where my resistance to any kind of executive order, which, has been going on for many administrations. I've been expressing that for a while, but I just don't like the sort of, dictate from the power with, it's not what we pretend this country should operate as. But in the tariff side of it, if he's writing executive orders that then, which I don't even think that's legally how that should work, but that you can then just, which he's done, add tariffs to different circumstances. How does Congress then have the ability to stop that? Like, if it's an executive order, like, how does that work legally? Like, is there a pathway for them to say, if any executive order for that matter, that they can then legally through Congress say this has to change? Is that how would that work with tariffs?
Well, I think there are at least two approaches. One, the law is clear that a statute overrides any executive order, so they could just nullify it by statute. The second is that they could say that's an impeachable offense. And we're going to remove you if you flout our law, which hasn't authorized these kinds of tariffs for these petty political reasons. And the third is that they would have, if they wanted to vote, have standing to challenge the tariffs as an illegal usurpation of the power of the purse. So all those are three constitutional avenues of redress.
So the second two, where it falls in the category of them not doing what they should with the legal side of it. So the first one seems to be the path that's, most likely to happen. But see, from Trump's perspective, Article 2 or whatever, just I can do whatever I want. And that's how he seems to frame the executive order side of it, is that ultimately they don't have the right to stop him. Not to say that that's, I agree, that's what you said should happen, but that's what he'll ultimately argue. And that's why these things carry forward. It's kind of confounding situation that we're in with that, with the perception of Trump having the power to do whatever he wants because of the way they frame it,
Look,
so I think that'll continue.
If Trump thinks, which he seems to think, that he can run for third terms,
yeah,
I would not be surprised if Trump then asserted that Congress has no constitutional ability to impeach him. So
good point.
I think he would probably, if he realized that he was going to be impeached and convicted, I think he would challenge the legitimacy of that act.
Probably.
No, well, he's already flirted with the idea that that 26 elections won't be legitimate if it results in Democrats getting control of the Congress. Right. So, I mean, I go back, and I've repeated this probably more often than I should, that we have Trump has so degraded language that words don't mean anything anymore. They're not limiting. He just makes up and says whatever he wants a word means is what he says it means. So impeachment means nothing, or impeachment is there and then it disappears like the Cheshire Cat and Alice in Wonderland. He's already said, nah, international law doesn't confine me because I decide what international law is. So he has this view that whatever he decides he wants to be in the Constitution is there, and whatever he decides isn't there, isn't there. I mean, another example of this word game is birthright citizenship, where it says if you're born in the U.S. and you have to comply with U.S. laws, you're a citizen. He says it really doesn't mean that, because there's a hidden underlying meaning that if you are born here, but I don't like how your parents got here, then you're not a U.S. citizen. And so it's the total degradation of language that makes it impossible to have a rule of law. He just says, whatever you write into the statute, I'll ignore and say it means the opposite of what you wrote in. I mean,
Harry Frankfurt wrote a book, a treatise called On Bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a philosophical essay, and his argument was that lying is bad and bullshit is even worse. Okay, and he said that the defining feature of bullshit is not lying; it's complete indifference to whether what you're saying is true or not. Bullshitter isn't trying to hide the truth. The bullshitter is someone who doesn't even care about the truth. It's all performative. Okay. So when growing up, kids used to say in the playground, "Are you bullshit? Bullshit." That's the word that people use, and people knew. They knew bullshit when they heard it, and they called a bullshitter when they saw a bullshitter. So for me, anytime Trump speaks, the only response is bullshit, and that he's a bullshitter. Okay, there's no other, and I don't mean this, and I mean this in the sense of the academic way of the differentiating between bullshit and lying. Okay, I think it's complimenting him to only call him a liar. He's not a liar. He's a bullshitter. He's completely indifferent to the truth. He doesn't care about it. He's indifferent to it. He's not someone who says, "I'm going to think about the truth and maybe I'll tell a lie." He has complete indifference towards it. Okay. Yeah. He is a bullshitter. Every word that comes out of his mouth is bullshit. Okay.
To that point, Jeffrey, I brought this up many times.
Treated. Okay. A bullshitter, bullshitting. Okay.
To that point, I brought this up many times in the show where I look at what we're seeing and it's obvious we've seen a lot of dishonesty, just repeated lies, but so many times I'm like, why did they even lie about that? Like, that doesn't even benefit them. In fact, the lie itself actually hurts them, even if you accept the lie. And there's been so many examples like that. There's your point, just lying for lying's sake, or rather just to your point, not even caring about the truth. Just, it's like, what it is? It's like some sociopathic impulse, like just to be able to manipulate or something. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense, but I've seen that many times.
But I think I have a supplementary perspective here.
Go ahead.
I don't think that their brains actually distinguish between truth and falsity. I think they live in a fantasy world, and that reality is whatever they want it to be.
Well, that's an indifference to the truth.
And they don't. It's not an indifference. It's that the truth or falsity doesn't even have. They're not two distinct categories in their brains. All it is what they want the world to be like, and everything else. And that's it. And that's why they don't suffer any what you would call cognitive dissonance when they make these utterly preposterous statements.
And that's, again, what doesn't make it a lie. It's what makes it bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a lie if they say, "I know the truth and I'm going to say something either." It's bullshit if they don't even care whether it's truthful or not. They're not even going to think about it. And it's not even a consideration in the expression of the words. The question is, will the words they put together accomplish what they wanted to accomplish?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that drives them for their words, and that's what makes it bullshit. So yes, so when I read Frankfurt's essay, a long time ago when the book was written, but recently, I've gone over it again because I gone on it with a specific application of, when you read the book, you think for Harry Frankfurt had Trump in mind when he wrote the book to distinguish between it dealing under these type of circumstances. So, Trump ought to be called out for what he is. Okay. People should have stopped calling him a liar, and he lied on this. He's a bullshitter, and the content is his verbal excrement should be treated as bullshit. That's what I call it. Verbal excrement. Okay. Bullshit. Verbal excrement. That's what comes out of his mouth. Eruption of verbal excrement. Okay. So that's my opinion. Ryan, any comment?
No, sorry. My audio, my video keeps cutting out, so I missed the last part of what you said there. But I agree with clearly. I think the continual point is that Trump is out there just nonsensically saying things. Now, as always, we have all of us can point out that we've seen similar traits from previous, but there just is something bombastically unprecedented about the way he conducts himself. It's whether there's parts of him just being wrong and not being aware of it, like the MS-13 thing, or maybe that's part of the same point. Maybe he convinced himself that was the truth, but it's just every single conversation. Or to make your point in just a benign sense, he'll sit there in front of interviews or press briefings and just ramble into some nonsensical part of a like they'll be asked about, like I've seen worse examples where asked about, people killed in a war zone. And somehow he turns that into praising himself for something he did in a completely different conversation within 30 seconds. It's just like this rambling, so I obviously agree. I just think it's something, the way he does this is, I don't know, there needs to be a word created for the way he does this is different for everybody else, because it is pretty insane.
Yeah, that's why I use the word verbal excrement. So, but and make it clear, I also called Biden a bullshitter. So Biden to me was also, I think some presidents are liars. Okay. So like, I think Nixon was more of a liar than a bullshitter. Okay. So in my opinion, but Biden to me is a bullshitter. Okay. And Trump is a bullshitter. Okay. So I want to be understand clear is I also thought Biden, there's no ideological that, I hate Trump. No, I thought Biden was a bullshitter. He said a lot of bullshit. Okay. And he said some incredible bullshit. Okay. And Trump is just on a different level, but Biden also bullshitter. Okay?
I think you can make a case for most politicians being in that category, or really just sociopaths, because that's kind of the point, right? Is that there's like an indifference to most things. It's really about just being able to, manipulate people around you, and I think that applies to most politicians today.
I don't even know. Sometimes when I don't watch the Sunny shows anymore, but I do see, when I do see when people send me articles of people that appear on the Sunday shows, and see what people say. The media shouldn't even put these people on. Really, the media really think about the media. Media talks about social media. Okay, that lets people circulate bullshit. Okay, but the media doesn't look at itself and think about how much of a platform they give for people to express bullshit and verbal excrement. Really, if you think about all the list of things you listen to on these Sunday morning shows, how much of it is bullshit? How much does any American really get anything of substance on any of these shows? Are they learning anything? No. People are getting their own bullshit reinforced, with lines like the stupidity of Bessent at his comment, like people say things that they think have profound statements, like free speech without freedom of reach, bullshit. Okay. So, so many people get up and all they communicate is bullshit. And then you got this anchor person on who's pretending that this is really a serious conversation of matters of the state, matters of the republic, okay, that people should watch and pay attention to, because they're going to have a substantive conversation, because people are dressed in a tie and they look professional and they got a nice desk and they like a nice studio, and think that this conversation has any substance whatsoever. No, it's just, I don't know how anyone finds it entertaining. Okay. But what most of comes out of their mouth is bullshit and verbal excrement. Okay.
A somewhat related example. I was just CNN. There's a clip going around of was it Tricia McLaughlin from Trump's administration, and them discussing the Fourth Amendment case, and basically Wolf Blitzer just brings new point and says, so should Americans have to be carrying around citizenship with them to verify citizenship? I'm pretty sure everyone there knows that's unconstitutional. She then goes off to explain why, yes, that's the case, and that's why it's completely upheld by the Constitution and all the law. And then they just let that stand and move on to a new point. This is CNN, for crying out loud, is being framed as the group pushing back against everything Trump. It just, it's what you said, Jeffrey. It's also the fact that I think there's an interest in just kind of allowing this momentum. But, it's such bullshit, as you're saying. It's frustrating to see how continual this is,
And think about part of that comes because we have an epidemic of constitutional illiteracy. Yes. These people have no clue what the Constitution is about. They have "we the people" in a few words. So that's why the media doesn't understand any of this stuff. They're writing about Trump. Almost everything Trump does is unconstitutional. Take Venezuela. No, he didn't have any authority to get the military there. You can't kidnap and engage in piracy on the high seas or in coastal waters. They never even asked this question because they are constitutionally illiterate, because they've grown up in this realm of limitless power in the executive branch, starting at least with Harry Truman, going back even further. And they never ask any questions. We don't teach civics anymore. So no one has any clue really what separation of powers is about. And no one even asked, well, did Congress hasn't authorized this? I mean, we're now down to the situation is, well, if the president called them on the phone and told them I'm going to do an unconstitutional war, that satisfies the Constitution. I mean, it's really completely ludicrous. And that's why ultimately, and I know in this, it's a long-term policy, we got to change civics and education. We have clueless people who have no idea when the law is being violated from sun up to sundown by the executive branch and Congress.
Yeah. Again, going back to people complain about social media platforms that give people a voice and circulate the type of content. Here you invite somebody on who's completely nonsensical. Okay. Think there is no constitutional obligation for people to walk around with an ID, okay, proving their citizenship. So think about now the catch-22. The catch-22 is I have to, if someone goes and says, prove you're American, I say, I don't have a driver's license, so I don't have a driver's license to show you because I don't drive. I didn't carry my passport around, okay? Then you got to basically say, if I don't say, please arrest me, if then I'm basically not only am I detained because I don't have the evidence they claim I should have that our Constitution says I don't have. Now I'm basically resisting arrest, okay, impeding an officer from doing their duties. And if they can't get me on one charge, maybe I didn't put my arms behind my back the way they liked it, so they'll come up with some other charge they'll invent against me, and then because I'm a big guy, maybe they'll say, my movement was a threat to the life of them, because I tried to move, and then they'll shoot me and say, I'm an armed weapon because I'm a big guy, and this is the way they had to. I mean, this is the stupidity, of the type of logic going on today, and the media is circulating this stuff because they're treating these people as if they have something serious to say. No, it's inane and nonsensical, okay? And the media that considers themselves the arbiters of what is good content and not good content, and a role model for how everybody, should moderate content, okay? They're the ones spreading more nonsense, more bullshit than anyone.
Yeah, but I think but the fundamental principle that lies behind this insanity is presumption of innocence. It's a simple principle. You're presumed innocent until the burden is shouldered by the government to show that you're doing something wrong. That's what's being turned on its head. It's assumed now you're here illegally unless you show that you're here legally. No, that's not how it works in the United States.
That's what it's called, Kavanaugh stops, right, Bruce?
Yeah.
That's what Kavanaugh stop. It's just a Kavanaugh stop. That's all.
One of the things they continually do to what you were saying, Jeffrey, is they'll come up and they will demand citizenship, which is a violation in and of itself, as if you care to look at the Fourth Amendment. And so ultimately, then without somebody not complying with that, they then arrest them, right, for that action. And if they refuse that, then they ultimately what happens and I've seen this continually throughout this process, but it goes way before this, then the charge becomes resisting arrest. Then you basically created a situation based on an unjust stop, and then their action to that, which is just, becomes the crime. And then when McLaughlin and the rest stand up and discuss that, it simply becomes that ultimately that they resisted arrest, but they don't get into the reality of how it all began. And this is you're creating that situation, which is something that's come out as sort of policy for them at this moment, sort of standing in front of cars, for example, or creating the circumstances surrounding, causing conflicting direction. So then when they act in some way, then it's whatever they do is justification for violence, for force, to do something about it. And then as we just demonstrated, no matter who they are, even if they get released and they're not arrested for no reason, they still benefit from that. They've created a perfect storm for allowing these people to profit off illegal action and driving them to do so.
But that's what I'm saying. Congress can change the incentives. They just give the right to sue these people for damages, triple damages, make sure they have a right to jury trial. Is a jury of their peers will decide whether
they're all covered. No warrant. You know what I mean? Like, how do we? Go ahead,
Think,
Jeffrey.
yes, Ryan's going to make that point. I think about the absurdity of it. They're all covered. They're not giving you who they are. So they take you to some place. You're arrested, and you think about, who do I have my act against? My act against somebody.
Right. How do you sue them if you don't know who it is?
So now I got to go back to, now I got to go to Christie and say, or Pam Bondi, and say, look, I was arrested. Do you know who did this? And they say, no, fuck you. So that's it. So you're fucked. That's the system. That's the catch-22. Okay, that's why this is absurd. Anybody who defends them being, if they're masked, they're unaccountable. Okay, if you can't identify them, they're unaccountable.
Well, they're legally required to identify themselves, right? They're legally required to present these things. So, they're coming at this from
absolute immunity, Ryan. Absolute immunity. Absolute immunity.
Right.
But they have that because Congress hasn't changed the statute, and you can sue in circumstances that you've postulated, Jeffrey. You can sue a John Doe. You get discovery, and then you go in and start interrogating. And then with discovery, you identify these people if they haven't disclosed themselves voluntarily like they're supposed to with masks. Congress can prohibit the use of masks. No monies of the United States shall be expended to pay anybody in ICE who wears a mask in their enforcement. Done. They can't have a job then.
This is part of my January 30 demands. No masks.
Yeah.
No masks. They have to identify themselves. These are the rules.
Yeah.
These are the rules. If there's any one breach, they should not fund it until there's a commitment to do this.
Yeah.
And if they find an example that it's not done, defund again.
I just had an interesting thought, though, and this is where I see all of this going, is that might possibly be the problem, reaction, solution setup for them to privately fund the national police. And this is definitely something that they're talking about, right? So even if that's not the ultimate goal and they want to achieve what they're doing, that can be the secondary agenda that, well, if they force us into this position, we'll have Peter Thiel come in and fund the secret police or whatever else. And that's a real conversation. So, God, that's just terrifying. So, whichever direction they go, it ultimately benefits them. But
there is something called the Anti-Deficiency Act. You can't do that. The Anti-Deficiency Act is to prevent circumvention of the power of the purse by providing that the executive cannot spend money that hasn't been appropriated by Congress under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. Because otherwise, you're right, you run a plutocracy. Well, the power of the purse is worthless. You just go to the billionaires, trillionaires, they fund this.
But aren't there numerous
illegal? And the Anti-Deficiency Act is a criminal prohibition. But you got to enforce the darn thing. Congress got to care about it.
You already had Miriam Adelson offered $250 million for him to run a third term. You already have people giving to have him build, a
ballroom.
The ballroom. You have people funding his inauguration. I think Ryan makes a valid point. The point is, yes, he can do all the things he wants to do until somebody puts a stop to it. Okay. And right now, if all he has to worry about is me being impeached, okay, and that's what's going to stop me is impeachment, and that's all that constrains me. I don't think he has any worry that he's going to be impeached. So he'll give. I mean, just look at the abuses that he's had. I mean, the Department of Justice has a criteria for giving out pardons. Now, he's not obligated to follow that criteria, but the reality, he hasn't come close to finding that, and he's done something, unprecedented, I think, and the fact is, he's forgiven about $2 billion worth of obligations of people that he's pardoned, that he's not only pardoned them from, their crime they committed, he excused them from making retribution to third parties that he shouldn't feel he has the right, he should interfere with. That clearly should be an abuse of the pardon power. It's a corrupt use of it, and that's just another thing he should be impeached with. Okay. So, so he's shown he has no fear of impeachment. He does have some limits about the public and maybe the court doing something in a way that people will find unexcusable, like the Insurrection Act, that maybe he'll trigger it for a way that too many people will think he went too far, so that seems to constrain him. But Congress, no, I don't think he has any concern, any fear of what Congress, will do in a way to limit him.
Now, is there a path, like I was kind of saying before, is there a way for Americans of their own volition to create an impeachment moment? I feel like there has to be some level of representation in Congress to begin something like that. But if let's just say hypothetically, every American in the entire country signed a document that said we want Trump impeached, what would be the meaning behind that? Would there be value to that? Like, is there a way we can get this happening without Congress?
Well, of course. I mean, those would be signatures. A petition, this is a First Amendment right to petition Congress for redress of grievances. And if there were 1 million, 2 million signatures saying Trump needs to be impeached, that definitely would have influence in Congress. Would it then be would demand still that a member of Congress make that happen? Or would there be momentum behind that whether or not Congress got involved? Is that possible? Well, no, I mean, we don't have at the federal level what you're basically describing would be referendum initiative where you get enough signatures, it forces a legislature to act, which is true at about half the states where you can force action by the legislature. But that's as a matter of law, but we don't have that at the federal level. But certainly if you had millions of signatures, it would be influential in what Congress ultimately would decide.
I'd like to believe so, even with enough opportunism in there. Like I point out with any of these people, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or anybody else, like whether they're genuine in what they're saying, just the fact that they're saying it makes a big difference, And I think it tends to be that they just kind of recognize, which I think I can see, that the majority of people aren't really okay with this, and that they see more of a benefit in saying the right thing, even if they don't believe in it. Because, like you say, they're sociopaths. Paul want to benefit themselves. So let's make sure they see that there's more of a benefit from simply acknowledging the truth today. However we do that, Yeah.
I got to go at 2:00, which is 4 minutes.
Oh, yeah, I have to also go. So, Ryan, Bruce, you want to sum up your comments for today?
Well, I'll start so Bruce can finish. I just, sorry for coming late today, but I enjoyed the conversation, guys. And I think that this is growing with importance every day. And I think what we're doing is reaching people. I do, because I think it's right now, there's, in my opinion, a lot of people out there that they don't feel represented with the political conversation because it's all hyperbolic and it's all or nothing, left and right. And I'm starting to think most people are finding somewhere in the middle, and that they see this kind of conversation and they go, finally, there are people that are objective and nonpartisan and see this information. So appreciate you guys as always.
Yeah, the center holds. I say, listen, the country is great because we're all teams. We're all Americans. We're all in favor of the process. We treat each other with dignity. That's what makes the country great. And I think it's an encouraging sign. I think that those who are kind of putting their finger to the wind, I think right now it's looking favorable, but it requires you to be active as a citizen. You have rights as citizens, we talk about all the time, got obligations too, even if it's not by a court order. Be vigilant, and we'll all succeed together. That's what I have to say.
Thank you to both of you, and have a great day.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jeffrey.
See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.